Welcome to Rediscovering Childhood, a podcast for teachers, parents, and education leaders who believe childhood should be protected, respected, and truly understood. I'm your host, Mireia Lopez, founder of Discovery Playtime, educator, and passionate advocate for play, creativity, emotional well-being, and connection. Each episode brings you thought-provoking conversations with inspiring guests from Ireland and around the world, exploring childhood, education, parenting, behaviour, emotional development, creativity, neurodiversity, and the future of learning. This podcast is here to challenge outdated thinking, spark reflection, and help us create a world where children don't just achieve, but truly thrive, while making sure we have fun along the way. Have you ever wondered whether we are preparing children for the future or for the past? The world has changed dramatically in just a few decades. Technology, careers, communication, and the skills children need to thrive are evolving faster than ever. Yet, in many ways, our education system still looks remarkably similar to the one that was designed generations ago. So what if the question isn't how we improve education, but whether we need to rethink it altogether? In today's episode, I'm joined by Dr. Enrique Cachafeiro, an educational researcher, former high school teacher, training coordinator at Duke University, North Carolina, and passionate advocate for educational innovation. After years of research into why education has struggled to evolve, Enrique is challenging traditional thinking and exploring what learning could look like if we designed it for the world children are actually growing up in today. Whether you're a teacher, principal, school leader, or simply passionate about the future of education, this conversation will challenge assumptions, spark new ideas, and leave you asking one powerful question. If we were designing education today, would we create the system we currently have? Dun, dun, dun. Enrique,
Great
very
question.
welcome.
Thank you.
So what is your answer to that question? Would we?
Yeah, I think definitely we should probably try to shoot for something a tiny bit different, considering how much society has changed in that time. So that's definitely where I stand. We need something new.
So you talk about new, you talk about innovation, improvement. And I met Enrique at Prussian at a conference in Exeter a few weeks ago, and I was blown away by his talk and his workshop on how you broke down what needs to be done, comparing traditional system with the more innovative system, and seeing the difference when you were able to compare and realize it's that aha moment. And all the things, I liked how you broke it down into grades and systems and teachers and all the things. So nearly went through all the excuses I can come up with to why I don't want to innovate. I want to stay the way I am. And then, yes, but this is the impact. This is what it does. This is how you can do it. So what is the difference? Why innovation, not improvement? Why change? Why do we need this so much?
So that's been a question that's been plaguing me for quite some time. When I first started my career into innovating education, my second year in teaching, and I tried to change things for students that were obviously bored and not engaged. And things seemed so tough for both me as a teacher back then and them in trying to get through content. And the why that was. It was obvious that they struggled with having to sit over long periods of time, that this method of memorizing things, there had to be lots of sticks and carrots to get them to move further along in the process. It just seemed from the bottom up to not be very efficient. And that's where I started. And ever since, evidence seemed to just mount on how the system that we have now was never designed for a world that moves as fast as ours does. So my career in innovation has been all about trying to figure out that puzzle of why we need to change, which has become obvious, and then why haven't we changed? I found theorists and educational innovators from the early 1900s that were posing that same question, asking about why this structure and how it was not working for students. In the 1970s, there was a lot of investments into changing schools here in the States, and they didn't take. So when I started my doctorate, I was trying to answer that after having had some success in my own classroom with games and with blended learning, hybrid learning, other structures, and seeing how the students thrived, but not seeing it anywhere else. I was really puzzled by why we were still stuck in doing the same thing. we used to, and that's where I began. That's where I began
What
researching
answers have you found
into it.
so far to why we're still doing the same thing? Is it just easier?
Yeah, the Tyke and Cuban are two authors that really got into this, and they call it the grammar schooling. The grammar schooling being the rules we have accepted as a society and we have ingrained in us as to what education is. And right now we equate schooling with education. So when we think about educating children, we immediately go to a place of classrooms and teachers and textbooks and subjects and all these items that were part of an original model that was first constructed in the 1800s in Prussia. A system that was great for taking education and making it standardized for an entire country, which was great for Prussia. And we adopted Horace Mann went over here from the States, saw the model, adopted it there in Europe. It was the standard that they that was the standard for education, and it was adopted throughout there and eventually the world. So it was great at bringing in new students. It had a really efficient system of introducing students to the classroom, of moving them along, of getting them a basic education. It had a lot of benefits back then where we had a very disjointed system of education based on the one school, one classroom schoolhouse, which was they did not have many standards. So you had kids from different ages inside the same room. The headmaster would teach subjects that varied quite a bit. There was no accountability. Sometimes the form of discipline was barbaric. There are accounts of students that in the early 1900s would rather go back to the factories than go to the classrooms because it was so strict. But either way, the system that they needed back then was very much that Prussian efficient system, especially with the industrialization of society and new factories coming in. They needed individuals that had a basic training and could follow orders and conform to whistles and bells, etc. So it was great. And that marked a revolution in education that shifted how we instructed. However, since the Industrial Revolution, we've had the information age and data age in the 1970s, 80s, and 90s, which transformed the face of society again. However, our system remains the same, outdated, and not what we need.
Yeah, so it was great because we went from nothing to something, and that something worked for the society that we had back then. But it's the need for rethinking that society is no longer here. We have evolved
Yeah.
so much and so fast. So, what are the things you see that education should embrace more in today's world?
So in today's world, the key thing is our relationship with knowledge, right? So traditionally, knowledge has been behind some sort of gateway. Back in the Middle Ages, and for a lot of our time, especially in Europe, that gateway was church, and they tended to house all the scribes, all the folks that could write. For a while there, they would use in Spain to still do this. They still lecture in Latin. They reason write in Latin. So a lot of the knowledge was kept from the common folks, and you were kind of they interpret for you what you needed to know, what information was important, even your morals. They would dictate that to you, so the society was kind of standardized as to what they knew and how they felt about things, and we're not encouraged to get much beyond that. So as we moved forward into the industrial age, we see that was more equitable in that we try to bring knowledge to everyone. Reading, writing ability was more standardized, so more folks were literate, which is great. But when Prussia came up with their system, they had just come out of a great big defeat at the hands of Napoleon, and needed to reconstruct society and needed to bring everyone into nationalist sort of ideals of supporting society. So school was there to not just bring knowledge, but also bring a sense of citizenship and kind of civic duty. So that was part of it too, is bringing everyone into an organized state where they would support a national system. So there was this way of breaking everyone apart, kind of sitting them down for certain periods of times, moving them along, and putting out a group of people that were ready to serve either in a municipal capacity or in industry later on. And those values were not good for a society that we have now that is looking at an age where we need wonder, curiosity, individuals that can adapt to different types of knowledge and act independently, right? Employers don't want to babysit their employees. We no longer have individuals sitting in long rows at a conveyor belt doing the same task. That's the kind of task that is being phased out by automation, be it robotics, AI, or combination of the two. Anything that is that standardized it's exactly the kind of jobs that are disappearing. Back then, you had a career, right? You if you went to college, you would specialize in a thing. You would get your degree, and that's what you did for a lifetime. And now the average is 7 to 8 careers, and that's going up higher and higher as
Right.
careers shift, change, and disappear. And that requires lifelong learners that are willing to embrace going back and restructuring themselves, reinventing themselves, grabbing onto new information, new knowledge, new skill sets nearly constantly. That process is just becoming more and more evident. However, the product of schools and college are individuals that feel like they're done. Like this is an end goal. It's a final state. I went in, I got my high school diploma, I got my college degree, I'm finished with learning. They're sick of it because they kind of had to be dragged through the whole process if they finish, and it becomes something that stops them from doing what they need to do, which is embracing the idea of, oh no, I got to go back and learn something new if I'm going to adjust. And without that, we have what is going on now in a lot of countries, this glut of individuals that graduate with a degree that is not applicable, can't find work, kind of in a limbo of what to do from there.
Yeah, it nearly makes me think that the fact that we're so stuck, it's probably because we grew up in that education system that didn't create and empower critical thinkers and problem solvers and creative people. So because we grew up in that system, we kind of, we're stuck in that box because we got that training. So it's very hard for people who have been in that system for so long to understand that things are different, needs are different, interests are different, society is different, and to rethink. And how many times have you heard that sentence of, well, we've always done it this way, so that's why we do it, but it doesn't
Yeah,
mean it's the right
yeah.
way.
I call it a crisis of imagination, and it's so ingrained in us. One of the most stark examples to me of how deeply ingrained it's in our minds of how we need to educate is I was watching a show called Skeleton Crew on Disney, which is a Star Wars show. It was had a bunch of kids, and they were kind of like kids that would go on and have adventures and whatnot. But in the beginning, it showed them still at home. And this is Star Wars, which is science fiction, thousands of years in the future, technology super high. They show the kids going to the classroom, and it is individual desks sitting in front of a very fancy screen, but still a screen facing forward to a teacher. It's a robot teacher, but it's still a teacher. So pedagogically speaking, even though it's fancier, it is very much structured just as like a regular classroom with the same sort of learning happening where they're memorizing subjects, etc. The authors of that show had the freedom to create wild virtual learning environments that brought skills in and the kids doing it in all kinds of different ways. But they couldn't think outside of what they knew, so they took a classroom and made it sci-fi, unable to think outside of that box, that mold that you're talking about, that keeps us from innovating, from trying to think of a different way of instructing. Here, it's worse in society because we have it ingrained into the infrastructure. So, for example, the innovation that happened in the 1970s failed because even though they were changing high schools, colleges were the same. So, without grades, the parents couldn't provide what colleges needed to for admittance. So the parents were unhappy with innovation that didn't include grades or standardized tests. With expectations being basically the standardized tests and scores, research and grants for research usually have that as a metric. If you're going to get this grant, you need to show us that the proof that there's achievement, and we do that with a metric that is made for the old system. So therefore, innovation that includes competence-based grading or mastery type instruction wouldn't even be accepted because you're not showing them the proof that they're looking for, which again is based on keeping things the same. So with those sort of systems in place of our thinking being stuck, metrics being used that favor an old system, that's some of the reasons why we're not making progress
Yeah.
into
Yeah,
something.
Totally
you know,
agree. Yeah. My kids brought here their grades from school and they're in primary school and elementary school, like their writing and all of that. And like, what can they improve? And I'm like, but that doesn't tell me anything. That just tells me they're not interested in whatever is going on in the classroom. I know they can do this much better, but in that space, in that environment, they're not interested. So they're not going to put any more effort than the bare minimum because they're not interested. So it doesn't really tell me their capabilities or how far they can take these or their actual skills. And then I wondered, why is kindness not here? Why is creativity not here? You know, you're measuring how much they know or their presentation skills, not their presentation skills, their presentation effort doing something they're not interested in. So it tells me nothing.
right?
It actually tells me, don't waste your energy in something you're not interested in. Well done. So
Yeah,
that's the
yeah,
difference.
yeah. It definitely is something that is done to them instead of a vehicle for their own journey into learning and education. And that's difficult to convey to individuals that can't see that difference, right?
Mm.
And this is where a lot of times I get stuck, and I'm sure you've had these conversations with others that will tell you how their student graduated, is doing great, has good grades, is going to go to college, and that is proof that the system works for them because that piece of it, it's also ingrained, is the fact that this is a measure of success, even though none of that means that they're ready for life, that they're ready for a career. And that's obvious. That's obvious in so many ways. One is the fact that they can't get jobs. Two is the fact that companies now have alternative ways to show competency. They don't rely on grades, they don't rely on college, they rely on certificates or micro credentialing. And
And
if you
they
can
do
get
that
that,
in-house. They do that themselves. That's not
yep,
something you can go in with. You'd have to prove those skills there.
yeah, yeah. And then you've spent all this money and time in this educational system that doesn't provide you the thing that it's supposed to. But it's worse than that, right? Because the system has a way of dictating your identity, of writing your narrative as to your abilities, what you're good at, what you're not good at. What really drove me into this space was my own children. As you know, they are quite the influence in our lives. And it was fourth grade for my two. And apparently, this is common for individuals, fourth and fifth grade, that their attitudes shift from being excited to get on the bus or see their friends at school or talk about what they did in class to being dragged to school, to looking forward to breaks, to dreading having to go in for their favorite subject to become lunch or recess because it's become a chore, right? It's become something that they are forced to do instead of something that they can engage with. And one of the biggest differences in those grades is that the first, second grade, there's a lot more games, there's a lot more play, there's a lot more interaction, there's some more personality, but that's slowly weaned out of the system in lieu of this idea of sit down, study the things, memorize the structure that just does not work for our children.
Yeah, it's very interesting because as I was reading your forum about your information, my son was there as well, so I knew it, and I asked him, "What's your favorite subject?" And he said, "Lunch. Why are you asking me?" And I knew it was the exact same answers, like lunch break and home time. That's his three favorite subjects, and that breaks my heart because we're doing a summer camp now, and it's all about self-expression, creativity, and problem solving through art, and he's so engaged. They all are so engaged creating things and thinking outside the box and coming up with games, and it just shows like they have it in them, and it's for the adult to trust them and to create that space for them to create and just be themselves, and they have so much in them. And that's the same child that you're telling me these presentation skills are not good. It makes no sense.
Yeah, and that's something that they learn too well, that they're not high flyers, that they're low flyers, which is the terms that they use here to differentiate in the classroom the students that are honors or better performing, and then the folks that are not are put in a different category for remedial education or are not able to take the higher level courses, and they see that, and now they internalize. Yeah, I'm not that good. I'm not that good at this or math or science. So that studies show follows them. They just don't try as hard. They get to college and they still identify that way. It defines them. So this system that we have not only actively underserves them by not teaching in a way that maximizes their potential, but it breaks them down to where they really are limited to this box, this identity that they're given as to what they're capable and not capable of. So it's not only actively not reaching the goals that we need for them to have in order to be successful in society, which is entirely the purpose, but they spend some of their best, most instructional, most educative years in a space where their potential, their creativity, their ability are boxed and limited, and it really has a negative impact on their self-worth, on how they see themselves. It really is a cruel system in a lot of ways. Now, if you can play the game like one of my younger son does, then you're great. And you get told, fantastic. You are able to keep quiet, to not be too curious and speak up, to get grades that again are meaningless, to go to college, which he's doing now. And so there's this fantasy that because he's done these things, he's going to be successful. And that's entirely what it is. And that's entirely what unfortunately happens at the end of this road is they graduate and realize, oh yeah, no one is coming up to me and giving me a career because I did these things. And a lot of times there's no career there for them. It's just glut. And now they're wondering, what did I do that for? Where did I go from here? Or they never finish. A lot of them get into college and are just unprepared for the more independent work required, and struggle and fumble at the end of the line. So it's all those are reasons that as I was doing more research into why we're here, how it doesn't work, I was scratching my head as to how can we make progress if it's so ingrained, if people won't invest in something different, if most everyone outside these conferences that you and I go to can't even fathom what I'm talking about when I say not school as an instructional tool, that there were ways to educate before school was a thing. Even when everything they watch on the movie screen on TV reinforces this idea that this is the way that we do it. So it's really tough to break that mindset.
Yeah. Yeah, all you said there is so true. It reminds me that quote that says, "Don't judge a fish for its ability to fly or to climb a tree." Now, you said this with the curriculum and all these expectations that in order for a person to be successful, they need to achieve certain goals, certain grades, certain degrees, or go to do certain things. And why? Just because you say so? Just because that's the idea we had of success? Because we didn't have that much access to that. So it looks like, oh, anyone doing this is very successful. But I think it's just so true. We really need to rethink everything. And then going back to the example of improvement versus innovation that you shared, I think at the conference you talked about a pencil. If we use a pencil for writing and then we use a pen and then we use a computer just for writing and typing, we're improving it, but we're not innovating. We're still using it for the same purpose. Same as
Right.
using a teacher or an AI robot. It's still the same purpose, fulfilling the same idea. So what does innovation really looks like in the classroom? What examples can you give us of that we can visualize? Oh, this is innovation. This is doing things differently.
Right. So the quote, and I have it here, make sure I didn't misquote John Dewey, that really got me thinking about this comes from 1902, and John Dewey, who was a fundamental educational innovator and thinker theorist, he said that the manner in which the machinery of instruction bears upon the child, these things, rather than the specific content of instruction, really control the whole system. So the machinery here being is this structure that we form, the way that we sit them down for a specific amount of times, which means that there's no time for them to follow their own pursuits in that knowledge or to ask them any questions because they're limited in the amount of time that we have there. The way that we break up the subjects, right? So we're gonna learn just the math somehow separated from its application, which is not how life works, right? If you have a job, you have math that's going to be math that's being applied to specific purpose. When you have things like arts and humanities being completely phased out to a lot of degrees in classrooms and ignored as somehow less important. And then the way that teachers remain your mediators for how the information is portrayed and conveyed instead of letting the students kind of interact with information directly. All these are part of a system that had a specific purpose in mind to produce a specific kind of learner, and every piece of it is made to support that. So looking at innovation versus improvements, the classroom has changed in certain ways that make it look like it's maybe innovative, right? You have maybe a projector to project your screen on the board. But when we look at pedagogically speaking, how that changes the learning, the information used to be written on a blackboard with chalk, right? I was in a couple of classrooms like that still back in the day. And then it went to whiteboards, which is much more efficient. You can erase it better. Then it went to projectors with maybe you can write with your finger. But again, do those mark an innovation? Does that change the pedagogy of the classroom? You're still putting in information up front for them to learn. That textbook could be on a paper, could be on a computer, but it is still pedagogically speaking the same methodology. The machinery remains the same. The nuts and bolts are different and more advanced. The machinery or the way the instruction is happening, the pedagogy is identical. So how do we change those patterns? How do we change the structure behind it? Is you identify this underpinning foundations that make up the classroom, these pieces that the Prussians used to make the model of education, and you challenge them. And that could look like hybrid instruction, blended instruction. It can look like more self-directed learning from the students. It can look like a lot of things that we do now, here and there. But my purpose with my dissertation was to identify those pieces and be more deliberate with challenging each and every one of them. So teachers can try to really push the envelope of instruction and get students more engaged and learning in different ways than what is afforded through tradition. And that tradition might look very advanced. It could be an AI robotic teacher up the front lecturing, but you're still lecturing. That still marks an improvement, but not innovation. The example that I use all the time that you probably heard from me is a car. In that we have like a Ford Model T, which is one of the first cars that was commercially made on the road, a machine made to travel from here to there on the surface. And then we have like a Tesla, a current vehicle that is much more fancy, a lot more technology involved, but structurally, functionally speaking, and something we can recognize in the form of the thing is that it's still made to go on the road. It is recognizably a car, functionally identical in its purpose, even though it does it better as far as like you get on the road faster. However, when you don't need to travel on the road, when you're trying to reach an island, and that's where innovation happens. When you're trying to do something fundamentally different, then that Tesla is no better than the Model T in achieving that purpose. You need to rethink from the ground up the form of it, the pieces that go into it, the materials that go into it to do something different. And that's what I'm talking about with innovation. Pedagogically, significant innovation requires a rethinking from the ground up outside of the mold of regular instruction of that shape of the car in order to achieve something different with our kids. And that's the biggest difference. And the inability to name those two things is where we're stuck, in that we name everything innovation, every piece of ed tech, every fancy doodad that we purchase, even AI, which a lot of folks think immediately is innovation. It's used to write papers. It's used to give us answers,
The opposite.
not change the
The
classroom.
complete opposite.
Yeah, yeah.
It's making
It's a big
everything
wake-up call.
lazy, and it's the opposite of innovation.
Yeah. And it's how we use the thing. Just like with a fancy whiteboard, you may be able to innovate with it if you let the kids go up there and maybe use it to explore their own ideas, for example. So it's about how we utilize these things, how we approach it, not the actual items themselves. And that's what my escape model is about, is breaking it down to give teachers, educators, district leaders, headmasters and principals an objective way to look at new methods and new tools and see if they're going to bring innovation to the classroom or they're just different ways of doing the same thing.
Yeah. So then the car, would it be a car that can fly, for example? That's where innovation, like a drone where you can get in and bring you to the
Yeah,
island. That is innovation. So
yeah.
what does that look like in the classroom then? Say, for example, different areas, different parts of the classroom, we have tables and chairs and space. And would innovation be, for example, having sofas instead of tables and chairs? Would that be
Good,
innovation?
good. Yeah. So to answer that question as to what true innovation looks like, I started by breaking down what conformity is, what tradition is, right? The pieces of it. The SCAPE model, SCAPE stands for evaluating the structural contrast of alternative pedagogy in education. So we're looking at the structure of the classroom and trying to see if this pedagogy you're trying to bring in contrasts that or it's different. So that's what I based it on, not on, I'm not trying to provide an answer. I'm trying to provide a tool by which you can make sure that whatever you're doing is actually innovative because it's different from tradition. And this is an important point, is that you can be innovative, but not improve things. The point is not saying that innovation is instantly a benefit to the students. The point is that before we can find innovation that is beneficial, we need to start making true innovation, to the pedagogically significantly innovative methods. So we start there, try to come up with things that are new. And then you still need to test them, right? It's like, okay, I have this new method of instruction that involves a lot more freedom for the students sitting on couches in the classroom. Great. This seems like actual innovative practices. Now we go through the process of collecting data, of trying to do a few classrooms this way, seeing if the students are happier, more confident, find metrics that make sense, and if it is improving things or not. But the first step is trying to come up with things to break that crisis of imagination and come up with things that truly are new. So then we can test them, collect data, and find that solution to what we need for society. So that's an important point. I'm not saying that just because we're different from tradition, it's better for the students. I'm saying that to start that road on finding the new educational paradigm and have this revolution that we need to start thinking outside the box. And this is a roadmap to getting outside that box so we can begin the process of coming up with what we need for the students.
That's so powerful, and it just shows like it's not about adding more resources. It's just changing perspective and how you
Yeah.
use things. As you said, it's not what we do, it's how we use it. And I
Yeah.
say the same with when I do my teacher trainings. It's not about how much children know or what children know. It's about how they use what they know in the world. Someone may
Yeah.
know a lot, and then in real life situations, they don't know how to use it. You might know a
Oh, yeah.
lot of words, and then in a social situation, you don't know how to interact with another person.
Yes.
Or you might know a lot about swimming. I can learn about how to swim for a whole year, and then you throw me in a swimming pool, and I won't be able to swim because it's practice that I need
Yeah.
to actually be able to swim.
It's what they internalize, right? So the true measure of learning is a change in behavior. What they do now is a lot of surface learning, a lot of like, okay, I have to do these things to get a grade. It's goal oriented. It's not about bettering themselves or engaging with information or being excited about it. And that is all of it. Like I remember when mine were little and come home and they learned, I don't know, about worms or bugs, and they would tell me all about it. And that was excitement, right? That was information that was not just learned, but it was ingrained in them, and they would go out and look for these things. And that's the sort of long lasting learning that is significant, and everything else is chaff. It's just simply checking off boxes so they can graduate, but they get out no better. I remember a couple of instances of in 10th grade, which is, I'm not sure what the equivalent is, but 10th grade is nearly done with high school. And I had students that could come in and they would ask me questions like, so are plants alive? Even though they definitely had a lot of science before then and something that they covered, but it's all gone, right? By the summer comes or break comes, they took the test and they forgot about it. None of it's internalized. So it's the system that we have now is perfunctory and mostly useless as far as providing individuals that are ready for the world. Trying to find them ways to get them excited, engaged is everything, and teaching in ways that serve them. The system that we have is based on efficiency. It's based on what makes it easier to move them along. So we have classrooms that are this amount of time for this many days because that's the structure that we have. We can employ teachers for this amount of time. There's their contract. We can buy books, and these companies sell textbooks, and they make money. It's all very much structured in a certain way that fits society. And doing true instruction involves giving the kids a time to learn things well. It doesn't fit in 50 minutes or 90 minutes. It fits on whatever they need. So a student-centered system of instruction is key, is making them the focus. What do they need? What tools do they need? How much time do they need? How do they need to approach the information? That's where the discussions should begin if you want to reach their potential. And that's the exciting part, right? These students, their potential is never tapped in these instances. And I failed way too many students that were really, really bright, but because of ADHD or because they just don't want to play this game of sitting down and being quiet, they get in trouble and they end up not finishing the class, failing out, or just being average because they get so despondent and so checked out of what we have going on. But it's not their intelligence, it's about them getting used to the system.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think I shared this example actually in relation to these at my talk, at the imagination talk that I did. And when I was talking to a teenage boy, he's autistic, and he was telling me about his teachers and his experience in school. And he said, "Oh, whoever, let's say Margaret, she's a really good teacher." And I said, "What makes her a good teacher?" And his answer was, "He gives me enough time for me to just do things in my own way, in my own timing, and she respects my timings, and then I get there eventually, but I can just be myself."
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that also makes me think, like, it's all about, like, it's not just the system or the resources that have changed or should change. It's the role of the adult in the classroom as well. We're not just there to teach, we're there to create a space where children can learn themselves in their own way at their own timing.
Yeah, yeah. That's one of the pillars, right? So the model has 7 different pillars that identify that all make up the educational paradigm, the structure, the building materials for how we teach now. And then I try to address each one in turn as to how we can challenge it. And what research shows is that as you challenge any one of these, you get instructional gains. You get students that are happier, can adjust better. And they're all things that we're familiar with. And a lot of them people don't even think to challenge. So, for example, the first one is age, which is the way that we break up students into age groups. So they're with peers, which make it a lot easier because then you kind of like, well, you think that they'll learn at the same level, which is entirely untrue. Students are of different abilities with different subjects. They're kind of the same size, so it's easier for discipline, etc. And it's easier to kind of keep them together, moving along with the same age. But it's entirely an artificial construct. When students are together in different ages, you have this wonderful thing happen where older students can become role models for younger students. Younger students have less behavioral issues because they kind of look up to the older students. Students are not given that ability in the classroom. They don't ever have the chance to become role models or to leaders to others because the teachers take that role. There's no leading, there's no independence, there's no ability to gain those skills because all that is given over to the teacher. So age is one, grades, the use of grades is one, standards, how we decide what knowledge is important and what knowledge is not important. And we decided very removed from where the kids are. The use of the school structure, like you were saying, the seating arrangement, these classrooms, they call them egg crate classrooms where you have individual small spaces. That wasn't always the case. Subjects breaking up into individual subjects, the use of the teacher as a sage on the stage, as the mediator for knowledge that tells you what's important, what's not important, and time. We just discussed it. How much time it takes to learn, how many days of the year it takes to be, it means that you've succeeded a school year, how many hours of instruction is appropriate for a subject. All those are subjective, and all those are part of the Prussian system that determine the pedagogy of the classroom. And all our teaching is based around these. And also that in turn determines the manner in which the students learn and get used to learning. And it doesn't fit society. And you see that in college a lot. I've seen it in my classrooms in high school. You put students into an independent learning situation, and because they're so conformed to these pillars on how you should learn, they get freaked out. They don't know what to do, especially the high flyers. So my model goes through in each one and identifies it and then finds ways to challenge it as a way to push the pedagogy and innovate instruction. None of it is technology based. Technology can facilitate the process, but it's not a magic bullet. It can definitely do a lot of things that are not innovation. So it's more about the way that you approach the teaching.
That's so good. It's such a practical way to break it down. Yes, rethink education with such a broad term. So by breaking it down into these pillars, you can actually see the age thing. And I can see how, the resistance straight away when you say, well, why do they have to all be the same age? Like, yeah, because that's how, like, that resistance, initial resistance of, well, that's the way it has to be done. Like, there's no other way. But then when you really become curious and open to maybe seeing different perspectives and trying new things. But I think the main thing here is the key message as well is to know that there is no perfect way of doing this, and there will never be. But the most important thing is that we're open to rethink consistently how can we do better,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
that's as perfect as it gets, I think.
Yeah, yeah. And that question becomes more powerful when you can get yourself out of that mold, out of that space of, how to improve things, but within the system that we have now. And I think that's where we shortchange ourselves. I want to come up with an educational game, but it's got to fit within the time period of the classroom. The teacher's got to be able to lead it. It's got to address the standards in a single subject. So you're automatically hobbling your efforts by sticking to this model that doesn't work. And by doing so, the pedagogy goes back to that norm, which is why things like AI are not innovating classrooms because they're making AI fit into the classroom and therefore changing what it could be doing for the students into what we need it to do to fit the system.
How can we use AI in an innovative way in the classroom?
AI is a lot like two previous technologies that really or destructive in the classroom to what they like to do. And those were laptops and those were mobile devices. And all three have the same features and that change the paradigm, the relationship between students and knowledge. Students without those devices are dependent on what's in the textbook or what teacher tells them. This is the source of knowledge, right? Once you have a laptop or a mobile device or AI, you have a direct relationship with the information. The question becomes, what do we need the teacher for? What is the role there in that case, right? And then the answer to that is teachers become more of assistants, facilitators, as the students interact with the knowledge directly. But that's very challenging to the classroom because then they're not interacting with the teacher. And the reason why laptops get pulled out and mobile devices and AI is that they distract. They say they distract from the classroom. It's like, no, no, the attention of the student is now between themselves and the knowledge. The knowledge that is there, the knowledge has been there since the 1980s, 90s when we had personal computers first come out. There's no reason for us to maintain this gateway of the teacher for the knowledge if we can teach students to be critical thinkers that can vet and look at knowledge responsibly themselves. It's just artificially complicating things and slowing them down by making everything funnel through that individual. And a lot of teachers know this already and can do one-on-one classes where the students can interact independent with the knowledge, and then they go around and work one-on-one with anyone that has trouble. The piece that is challenging for a lot of teachers is that when you do that, what you find, and what I've seen myself, and what you see with the data, is that students, for the most part, if they're engaged with the knowledge, don't need a teacher. The information is not that difficult for them. There's enough resources online to learn most things, and they learn it faster and quicker than they would through having to sit through a lecture and write notes. But this is disruptive to a system that very much relies on the teachers, one of the pillars, as well as grades and standards. So you have to learn what they want you to learn. And with those devices, you can learn whatever you want to. You can chase your curiosity. You can go down any number of rabbit holes, and that doesn't fit the mold. So the problem here being that when they finish college, they're going to go to a work environment that's going to be entirely dictated by using their mobile device to keep on task like we do, using a laptop to interact with a digital interface for whatever they do, and with AI that's going to be increasingly part of the equation. And we're removing those very things from their instructional experience, so they will be less ready for a future than ever.
And it just shows that if we're using school to prepare children for tomorrow, for the real world, we're absolutely not doing the right thing because we're not using the real world in the classroom. So again,
Right.
how are they going to do it?
Right. They're dependent. And we're making them dependent on that individual to tell them how to get to the knowledge, what knowledge is good. And these dependent children get to a real world unprepared to be left to their own devices. It's absolutely tragic what we're doing to them with the current system.
And it's a
We
fear of
really
letting
need to
go
change.
as well.
Yeah.
As teachers or as society or as a system, the fear of letting go and trusting the children to take their own steps, to guide, to lead, to show us. And then we are the facilitators. We are making sure that things are safe, that we set the guidelines. Our brain is more developed so we can say, okay, this is inappropriate. Let's not do these, or ask the right questions, the right prompts, the same as you use with AI. You put the right prompts to get what you need. And then you question that and you challenge that. And it's encouraging that. That's the role of a teacher in today's world.
Yeah. Yeah. They could do so much more if they weren't stuck having to invest their time into controlling, into classroom management, and to make sure they're quiet, into getting these measures, lockstep measures of success. So many tests, so many standardized assessments, and that's what's important. And bypass that the students are not getting any chance to explore their own potential, independence, ability to interact with information themselves and it really does leave them hobbled for the wild environment that's out there right now with things changing so fast.
And don't get me started on homework. Maths book, page 23. What's bigger, the car or the house? Like, I don't want my child to waste their time doing that. I really don't.
Yeah,
Comparison to what? What's bigger? Is the car big or small? Well, compared to what? So that's the critical thinking. It's not there, so they're wasting their time. But then they have to do it because that's the way we've always done it.
that it's this is that's the crisis of imagination that I spoke about earlier. Is in 1970s and 80s, that was one of the biggest reasons why a lot of these efforts that were funded, that were hundreds of millions of dollars, was that ultimately parents were like, this is not what instruction looks like. This is not getting them ready for college. They have to have textbooks because we had textbooks. They had to have homework because we had homework. And they doubled down the control, the inability for not just teachers but districts to give up control. So instead, what they do is, as the students get less engaged, they get more discipline, right? Stricter rules, more officers in the classroom here. There's talk about arming teachers because the answer to the system failing and the students being disengaged is make them engage more through sheer force. And it's an obvious reflection of what's important to us, which is the control and the discipline, not the student. That's why
Yeah.
if a student gets in trouble, they get suspension. All of a sudden, they're taken out of education entirely because that punishment is more important than the student's learning.
Wow. Yeah. So true. I've one more final question, Enrique. You were a high school teacher and you learned a lot from that experience and from your own children. So we do have to, if we're working in the system, we have to comply with the system's requirements. But as teachers, as individual teachers, and anyone listening to this episode today, what are the things we can do as individual teachers to start taking action, innovate more in the classroom, trust our students, and follow their lead and create that space for education that will prepare them for the world they live in?
It's tough, right? First, it depends on the kind of environment that they work in, because I'm very aware that some schools are very much micromanaged by their administration. So their lesson plans are turned in, there's a certain set of rules to follow, so it's difficult to intervene into a system that looks like that. But if they have some freedom in their classroom, if they have a principal or headmaster that gives them the room like mine did to innovate, then just do a little research into different practices. They're out there. None of this is new. The first thing that I found out when I looked into how we changed the classroom was that the research's been there for decades on what works better. Almost everything works better than what we do now. The website where I have the model, escapemodel.com, has this kind of broken down a little bit on different ways to challenge different aspects of conformity. Like, for example, Montessori is a great model for schools that does a lot of this already. They mix students from different grades together for instruction. Sometimes they use rubrics and competency-based assessment instead of grades. They give you more freedom, how the students sit in the classroom, like you said, couches or flexible seating arrangements. They have mixed subjects, so they'll bring in an art teacher and a science teacher and discuss things together that integrate those subjects. Those are all small ways to try to push at what the old model does. The teacher sometimes can step back. I stopped lecturing my third year of instruction. I let the students engage with the knowledge and I would work with them one-on-one. So as the teacher, you can take more of that facilitator coach on the side and let the students have more freedom with how they approach the knowledge. Give them more time, like you were mentioning, time to work on things. If the test is the end all be all to the knowledge and you move forward, what happens to all the students that haven't gotten it? Well, it's just a lot of times it's just not important. We got to move on. So lots of small ways that you can have an impact on the pedagogy of your classroom. And they don't involve technology. Technology can facilitate, like a laptop could facilitate, but you can find other ways to do it. It's just one means to help you in changing the structure, the underlying principles of the classroom that really define the pedagogy of what you're doing. And that's the biggest thing they can do is kind of find ways that work for them and their students, because every classroom will be different. All the kids are different, but where they can shift things up, give them more control over their learning, give them more sense of ownership over the knowledge so they can feel empowered and celebrated for their own individual, wonderful way of thinking.
Yeah, and that makes it also really simple because to do better, we don't need to do more. We actually need to connect more and learn from them as much as they're learning from us and the environment we're creating, and have those conversations, the one-to-one, the being curious and letting them tell you what they need and how can you provide that.
And that's the biggest thing, right? Student-centered instruction. If you put their needs, their curiosities, their potential at the forefront, worth more than having to stay quiet or finish up in this amount of time or pass this standardized test, then you can begin to really tap into that infinite powerhouse of potential that they each have. And that's how we maximize their abilities and get them ready for a future.
Absolutely. Enrique, thank you so much for sharing your knowledge, your passion, your experience, and your research with us. And we'll take it as far as we can. I can promise you that.
Thank you for having me. I love talking about this, and yeah, good luck in trying to spread the message.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining us for another episode of Rediscovering Childhood. If today's conversation made you pause, reflect, or rethink something about childhood education, parenting, or the way we support children, I'd love if you could help us continue spreading these important conversations. You can support the podcast by following or subscribing, leaving a review, sharing this episode with a friend, colleague, parent, or teacher, or even posting your biggest takeaway on social media and tagging us Rediscovering Childhood. Every share helps more people rediscover what children truly need to thrive, and together we can create a better future for the next generation. See you next week for another meaningful conversation.